Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about Joker Folie, Deux, which was released this past weekend. And the reason why I'm getting this video out late is mainly because I was out of town over the release of this movie, so I wasn't able to watch it on time, but I still wanted to make a review for it. But when I got home earlier today, well, a pipe had burst over the time that I was gone, and it was a mess. I'll put in some footage here, and I've arguably had a worse weekend than the Joker did at the box office, but I am still here to talk about this movie because it's a really interesting one that I got one comment asking for where my review was, so I decided, screw it, I'm literally be holding my microphone, I'm sitting on the floor, and let's just go for it. And so the unique part about me reviewing this movie late is the fact that I've been able to experience the audience reaction out of this movie. I've seen the critic reviews, I've watched a couple reviews, I've, read a bunch of stuff online about what people are saying about this movie, and, the D cinema score, and it failing terribly at the box office, and all these different news stories that are surrounding this movie that I find very interesting. And so I'm able to, I guess, input all of that into my actual reaction to the movie itself, and why I think that the movie had such a divisive reaction, and how my thoughts on this movie kind of fit somewhere in between all the noise of, all the Joker Folie Deux discourse that is going on around. And so I will be getting to spoilers for this movie, so if you have not seen the movie, I would recommend it if you're interested and if you don't want things to be spoiled for you. But I think that, not a lot of people are going to want to watch this movie because of these reactions. And so this video is going to be titled Joker Folie Deux or Don't. Should you go watch this movie? Well, let's just get into all the details. And the way I want to break down this movie is just with the different, hyperbolic reactions that I've seen coming out of this film, because that's kind of how the internet is nowadays when it comes to literally anything. It's either you love it, you hate it, and there's no in between. You have one distinct statement that you have towards whatever opinion that you have, and you're either on one spectrum or the other. And so the things that I've heard about this film, just, going into the movie, was that, oh, it's a musical, so I hate it. I do not like musicals. I don't know why they did this, and I didn't know it was going to be musical, and I hated it because it was a musical. Well, in my opinion, I actually really do enjoy musicals when it is done right, and I think that this movie sometimes does it right. It is a jukebox musical, is how they described it. It is filled with a bunch of songs that are not original. Some of them are popular songs that you've probably heard before, and some of them are a little bit more unknown. I think there are a couple original songs from Lady Gaga in this film, and I think you can really tell when they're doing original songs versus the non-original songs. I think the courtroom scene in general was very much a good example of what I wish more of the musical numbers were in this film, is them embracing the fact that this is a musical and going all out instead of, the more subtle singing that you see throughout the rest of the movie. And, when you have these big outlandish sequences, I think the film can be interesting. I think it's a very interesting take to take a Joker storyline and go in that direction. But I do get the immediate divisiveness amongst a lot of people, especially fans of the original one, which I don't think that demographic that movie struck a chord with really are into musicals at all. And so I think it's a really wild decision as to why they decided to make it a musical. I think that I read earlier today that it was apparently Joaquin Phoenix's dream that he had of why they made it a musical in the first place, which is even more wild. But if you're hesitant going to this movie because it is a musical and you're, dead set on not liking musicals, you're not going to like this movie. It's just going to be too much for you to get past. It's not going to be something that you're going to be able to, sit there, listen to these musical numbers and decipher what exactly these musical numbers mean. And I think a lot of the time that these musical numbers, I think the biggest issue with them is the fact that we already know the mindsets of these characters going into those musical number scenes, and it just kind of, repeats those same beats, those same feelings over and over again, and it feels like it just kind of beats you over the head with what the character is feeling at any given moment, instead of exploring what those characters are feeling and moving the plot forward at the same time, which is what I think the best musicals do. The other main complaint that I saw about this film was the fact that a lot of people thought that this movie wasn't a Joker movie at all, that if anything, it is an Arthur Fleck movie, but it's not an outright Joker film. And I think that is a sentiment, at least the mindset that I had immediately after watching this film, because the entire arc of Arthur Fleck in this film is to, he's in jail, he's in Arkham, he has this split personality, or at least the doctors are telling him that he has this split personality, and that, the Joker was a persona that did all the crimes in the previous film, and that Arthur Fleck is, insane. So that's going to be the plea that they're going to do in court to try to get him out of the death sentence, and that is really the drama, at least in terms of the court case that he's facing in this movie. And as the film progresses, you see that, Harley Quinn brings the Joker out of him, and he starts to act in the way that he used to, and this love that he has for this Harley Quinn character is pulling that persona back up to the forefront. But as you get further into the movie, and as you feel that this character just doesn't feel the same as he did in the previous film, you get the end of the film, which is him essentially denouncing the Joker and saying saying that that personality, that version of me is not really me. I am Arthur Fleck. I have remorse for what I did. I am more than those murders that I did. I am more than this rallying cry of bringing all these people together in this really weird and inciting violence and all this cult that he's essentially formed around him, that he's essentially denouncing all of that stuff and essentially denouncing the idea of the Joker at all, and that is what gets him killed in the end of the movie because his followers essentially revolt against him because of it. And quite frankly, I think the irony in how the mob mentality worked inside the world of the film versus how the mob mentality worked with the fans in our real world and how they mirror each other, quite frankly, I think it makes the movie better for it because of how spot on somehow, Phillips was with those ideas. I don't know how intentional that was, but he was spot on with it, which makes it really interesting. And so when I hear people say that they completely reject this movie because it wasn't a Joker movie, well, you're not wrong. It really is not a Joker movie. If anything, this movie is even more so an Arthur Fleck movie than the first movie was an Arthur Fleck movie. And if you go back and watch my review for that first film, there's a couple things that I say in that review that I'm a little bit embarrassed. That was my opinion at the time of watching that movie. I titled the whole video that Joker is the perfect film for 2019, and I talked about how it's very thematically resonant in terms of how I felt in that year. And to be quite honest, I don't fully know exactly what I meant in that review. This is back before I did full spoiler review, so I don't know exactly what my mindset was at the time of making that review. But as I've gotten older and as I've rewatched that film, the thematic elements are a bit muddled because I think, after the movie came out and the reactions out of the movie happened and it formed this cult following that kind of took Joker as like this aspirational figure of like, oh, I'm seeing myself in this character and I'm finally being seen on screen and taking it in the completely wrong way, because the way I took that film was being completely terrified by the character of Arthur Fleck and the spiraling downfall that he had in that film, and he truly terrified me to my core in that movie, which is, I think, was kind of the opposite of the other people that kind of grasp onto that idea. And I think that this movie does immediately attack that idea of, being aspirational towards the Joker. And you have the Harley Quinn character in this movie who is very much looking up to the Joker. Apparently they made a TV movie in the universe of Joker that's explored Arthur Fleck and a true crime type of thing. And Harley Quinn was obsessed with that. And so she, committed herself into the insane asylum to be able to be near, Arthur Fleck and to be able to get into contact with him and to have this whole plan to, get the Joker back out of him, to bring that rallying cry back up into the forefront. And it really does feel like a shot at those fans that love the film for the reasons that they love that film, the reasons why this following happened around Arthur Fleck in world. It's a very meta way to do a commentary on that first film, which I think is an interesting idea. Honestly, genuinely, I do think that is an interesting idea. But again, it does breed the idea that this movie is not a Joker movie, because if you're going to denounce those ideas and those themes in the way that they do in this movie, it's going to alienate that entire side of the fan base, which I think is at least 70% of the fan base that really love that movie. And then you have the people who just say that they didn't get the point of this movie at all, that they were bored by it. And I think that is kind of a mixture of those two other things that I already talked about. The fact that it is a musical and a lot of those musical numbers are, quite, I don't want to say bland, because, I found them interesting as a fan of musicals. But if you're not a fan of musicals, you're going to be watching these musical numbers and be thinking, why are we here? Why are we doing this? It's not moving the plot forward. We just kind of pause the movie at a very dramatic point in order to have the characters sing and dance about their feelings that we already know that they're feeling. And, I also agree with that sentiment too. There's a lot of points in this movie that feel like they just kind of stop for those musical numbers. And if you don't like musicals and you don't get the point of it and don't listen to the themes of what it's saying, and if you don't like the idea of it, getting into the really meta, commentary versus, what happened in the real world and how this movie's commenting on the real world. Like if you're disconnected from the internet, if you're not chronically online, like I am unfortunately chronically online, then I think you're going to miss a lot of the things that, Todd Phillips is trying to say with this movie, and you're just going to leave this movie thinking, what was the point? And again, that entire mindset, I don't blame you guys either for feeling that way. That is a completely fair thing to feel walking out of this movie. It's just feeling like, what is the point? Because Joker really doesn't do anything in this movie. At least Arthur Fleck doesn't do anything in this movie. Whereas the first film, Joaquin Phoenix's performance really terrified me. Like, it genuinely scared me. There was no scene in this entire movie that got me even close to the point of fear that I felt for that character. And I think that is, it is a very opposite. That's another thing that I said in my previous review, is that, this Arthur Fleck version of Joker is not really the comics Joker. I think that you can adapt comic books however you really want, as long as it connects to the essence of the character on page and you're bringing that to the screen. I think that does work. You can make your changes whatever you want, but as long as the essence is still there, then I think it still works. And I do think that the first film accomplished those sort of things, and he's very much the opposite of Heath Ledger in a lot of ways. And so when you get this film and you're doing continuation of that character, and you're even getting further away from that comic standpoint, then again, that fan base is like, what is crazy point of all this? Why is it a Joker movie if it's truly not about the Joker whatsoever? Again, I do understand that standpoint, again, because it just makes sense for those people. And then you get the people who really like this movie, the people that admire how different and how wild of a swing this movie was, because there is also a lot of great stuff about this movie. That's why I honestly don't truly understand the D cinema score, which I think is a crazy thing for this movie. I think it's a lot of the people that did watch this movie, the people that wanted them to make a Joker 2, which honestly I don't think there are a lot of people, me myself included, that thought they shouldn't make a sequel to the Joker. I honestly thought that it was a completely wasted idea to continue this world because how the first film ended. I don't really think that movie really deserved or at least warranted a sequel, and even Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix both, agreed with that. They were not planning on making a sequel to this film until they got a big, truck full of money pull up onto their driveway and dump $20 million in each of their laps saying, please make another one, and which, spiraled them to make something truly different and unique, and that is how we got this film. This is a movie that nobody really asked for, and so the people that did go watch the movie was that fan base that really did love the first one, which, again, if you make as wild of a swing as they do in this one, you're going to alienate all of those fans that did see it in theaters, which is how you get a D cinema score. But if you really look into this movie, I don't think it is all bad. I don't think it is trash. I don't think really any movie you can say is completely terrible and there's not a single good thing you can say about it. Even my least favorite movies of all time, I can find at least one good thing about them, and this movie has a lot more than one good thing about it. I think most people would agree that this is a very good looking movie. The cinematography, the lighting, the style, and the aesthetic that this movie has carrying from the previous film into this movie is absolutely gorgeous. I think the movie's score is really good as well. I think that the sequences, the musical numbers are shot very well, especially the one under the spotlight that you see in the trailer, especially the one in the court scene, the way that it kind of envelops the world and gets really interesting stylistically in those sequences. I thought it was really interesting. I thought the cinematography throughout the entire movie, the score, and the performances were all great, even though I wasn't as terrified as Joaquin Phoenix this time around in this film. That's not what they were going for in this film. So you also have to take into account the artist's intent into how the filmmakers wanted you to feel about this character and truly wanted you to feel like, oh, I shouldn't be, rooting for this character, for the people that were, aspiring to be the Joker for whatever reason after watching the first film. Or in my case, somebody who was terrified of this character is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be terrified of this person because he is truly going through really terrible things. His childhood was so, traumatizing, and you want to, root for this person to be better. And so in order to root for this person to be better, he needs to no longer be the Joker, which again causes a lot of the other problems that I've already talked about in this film itself. And so they really, back themselves into a corner where they're going to alienate pretty much every single fan that watches this movie. But the people who enjoy, sequels that take massive swings, that do something completely different from the previous film, then I think it works for those people. When it comes to all the reactions that I've seen from this film, the only people that actually liked this movie was some of my old coworkers back, in Colorado before I moved over to Los Angeles. And I actually, was back in Colorado earlier this weekend, and I hung out with them and I talked to them about this movie, and they all really, for the most part, they all really liked the movie. I think some of them really hated the idea of Joker dying in the way that he did at the end of the movie. They didn't mind, him dying at the end of this. I think that is the direction that he was going, or at least his character was going in this movie from the very beginning. I think that all made sense, but the unceremonious way that he died is kind of a thing that is kind of underwhelming for some people. But at the same time, if you make it such a big and grandiose thing, then you're sensationalizing him once again like they did in the previous film, and then it's going to make him a martyr. It's going to make those people that this film is actively trying to alienate in terms of the fan base, make him much more of a martyr, much more of a bigger idea than he was even in the first film. And so if you're trying to, do all these weird things with this character, again, I get the response out of this, but at least the friends that I have back in Colorado, they all like the movie because they do enjoy movies that have big swings. They enjoy very artsy films. They enjoy, digging into the meanings of a lot of these things, because I do think that, again, with this movie and what I said about the previous film of it, kind of being the opposite of Heath Ledger, I think even Harley Quinn is the complete opposite of Harley Quinn in some of the other films. I think Dan Murrell said this in his review, which I completely agree with him in this sentiment, is the fact that, Harley Quinn generally in the comics, or at least in the animated series and generally in history, is somebody who's very dependent on the Joker until she emancipates herself and pulls away from that character and, establishes her name on her own. Whereas this film is the opposite of that. This Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga, is actually going and seeking out the Joker. And the Joker in this film, Arthur Fleck, is dependent on Lady Gaga to have that persona. And when he breaks free of that, then Harley Quinn rejects him because of that. And now Joker is dependent on Harley Quinn in this version of this character, which is the opposite of what it is in, Margot Robbie's portrayal of the character, or the Harley Quinn animated series, or the origins of this character in general in comics, for the as long as this character has existed. And so again, I do think it takes a similar approach to Harley Quinn as, the first film did a similar approach to the Joker, which is do the opposite of what you get in, in comics and on screen, and what the other version of the character that you have seen before, to do something truly different, which again is admirable from a sense of like, let's do something unique and original that we haven't seen before. But from a fan base that is expecting certain things out of this character, you're going to, reject those ideas. I think this movie is also kind of clever with the way that it connects to the world of Gotham and the world of the DC universe in general. It's not overt in the way that it connects to the DC universe as, some other films does. It is as subtle as it was in the previous film, where you have the Bruce Wayne character in there, and you have the riots at the end of the film, lead to the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, and it's, tangentially connected to the Batman universe in that way, but obviously it's not connected because Batman and Joker are not existing at the same time. But in this film, you have this character, this, Joker character is in Arkham and is causing all this chaos, and in all this chaos, you have the other lawyer who is, prosecuting him is Harvey Dent, and in the explosion at the courthouse at the end of it, his face is burnt half away, and now he's become Harvey Two-Face. And to have an origin for Harvey Dent in this film, that I think is an interesting way to do that. In the background of the final shot of the film, after Joker is stabbed by the one random guy inside of the Arkham prison, which I think on rewatch, following this guy, because I think he was in one of the opening scenes, to follow this guy's, I guess, obsession with Joker, leading up to his point where he would kill Arthur Fleck at the end of the movie once he rejects that Joker persona, and then you see him in the background carving his face up and becoming the new Joker. At least that's kind of what it's alluding to. I think that on paper is a cool idea. I don't know if it really did work because this character was such in the background. I think the more you rewatch this movie, then maybe you'll accept the fact that this is the guy who ends up killing Arthur Fleck in this film, that, our Joker, our Arthur Fleck in this movie was never the real Joker, which again is going to piss some people off, because why make this a Joker movie? It's not the Joker at all. Well, it's an origin story for a Joker, but just the one in the future that will eventually be the one who fights off against Batman, which maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Honestly, I'm still conflicted about that myself. I just don't know. And so when it comes to this film, in my opinion on it, if you saw my letterbox, I very quickly just typed in with no star rating at all, just saying like, I really don't know how to feel about that myself, because I've seen all the wide ranges of audience reactions from my friends that really like the movie, that not as much as the original one, but they still really like the movie. And then of course you have some of the other people online that completely reject the movie because it feels like it's actively making fun of you for liking the first Joker movie, or have the people that think that it's just boring, or the people that just reject the idea that it's a musical whatsoever, the people that reject this movie because it's not about the actual Joker, that it's a rejection of the character of the Joker and the idea of the Joker. And so I think that this movie, from its base level, is extremely interesting to talk about. It's an extremely interesting movie to really dig into, and it's a movie that I honestly really do want to check out again, just to kind of formulate my actual opinion on this movie, because I kind of agree with every sentiment that I've talked about here in this review. Is I like a lot of it with the musical elements and the style and the cinematography and the performances. I like the idea of the art that Arthur Fleck goes into this movie, and I like the idea of how it connects to the larger world of Gotham in this kind of disconnected world. But then I also don't like the idea that it's really not about the Joker whatsoever, and that it's completely disconnected in that way. And I also don't like the fact that the musical numbers don't commit itself to being a full musical, and the fact that they don't give me such a rise in such moving plot forward and doing the things that musicals are great at doing. And then there's also the parts where it's very repetitive and it's kind of boring at times, because you're kind of stopping the plot, you're kind of stopping the pacing of this movie to do those musical numbers. And so my thoughts on this movie vary just wildly across the spectrum, which is why I didn't give it a star rating after first watch, because I don't know what in the world I would rate this movie, because I think this is a movie that you genuinely need to sit on. I think the reactions out of it coming on, the whole cinema score thing is generally out of people that were just, expecting something different out of this movie and didn't get what they want, which I think is a fair reaction to have. But, I think you all need to take consideration of what is the director's intent, what is the artist's intent in this thing versus, does it fit in my little brain of like what I expected this movie to be, because no movie is going to be exactly what you expect it to be. And if it is exactly what you expect it to be, you're going to be complaining that it's too predictable. And so it's a very small margin that a movie needs to fit in to really work and excel as much as it does for some of the greatest movies of all time. And there's also movies that take decades to be able to get its cult following and for people to turn around on it, like even The Last Jedi and stuff like that, is movies that will be appreciated much further on in time. And so I think that this movie might be one of those for me, and maybe it'll become worse over time. I honestly don't know, but I'm excited to talk about this movie more with you guys in the comment section down below. And also watch the movie again myself to really formulate my thoughts on it. And so yeah, those are going to be my extremely mixed and just complicated thoughts on Joker Folie à Deux. In terms of do or don't, which is what I'm titling this video, I think you do. I think you give this movie a chance. I think you have an open mind, and obviously if you know that you're going to reject this movie because it's a musical, maybe just skip it. I think that would be where you don't do this movie. But honestly, if you're in for an interesting time, if you're ready to take a risk and are not afraid to extremely dislike a movie, because you're okay to dislike this movie, I'm completely fine with that, because obviously there's a lot of wild things in this movie. I also agree that if you're not on board for that, you're going to hate this movie, and that's perfectly fine. Let's talk about why that didn't work for you. And it's just a really interesting movie that I am very excited to talk about it more with you guys, like I said, in the comment section down below. And of course, if you did enjoy this video and you want to support me, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video to see more reviews just like this one. And I'm very excited to talk about Terrifier 3. I don't know if my place is going to be as much of a disaster as it is right now in a week from now, but I will still be getting out reviews for that, because I'm very excited for Terrifier, along with all the other new releases coming out in October, some horror movies, some other films, and just, you know, the award season starting out pretty soon here as well. So keep in tune with my channel, and I hope to see you all in my next one.